Members of the City Council, please attend the call meeting of the City Council to be held in the 6th floor conference room, 801 Crawford Street, 6 p.m., Monday, July 21st, 2014, for the purpose of a public work session. In addition, you may consider a motion to go into closed meeting by order of the mayor. Mr. Cherry?
Here.
Mr. Edmonds?
Here.
Mr. Meeks?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Ms. Randall?
Here.
Mayor Wright? Mr. Rowe?
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We're delighted tonight to have, as our first item on the agenda, and our first presenter, our own Judge Holder, who's going to brief us on the concept that she's working on, something similar to drug court, as a DUI court. And so without any further ado, Judge Holder.
Ready to use this podium? Please.
Whichever.
Quite the lead.
Let us move this up here, and it works.
If you would like. I would love that.
Okay.
All right, good evening.
Good evening.
That's a little trick that I use in my courtroom every day. I'm going to say good evening again.
Good evening.
All right, thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for allowing me to come before you today to give you a little information about a concept that we're working on for DWI courts. I would be willing to bet that everyone in this room knows someone who has been affected by an alcohol problem. Whether it's a family member, a good friend, or someone in the community, it can be absolutely and completely devastating. But before I go any further, let me again thank the city manager for his assistance in putting this presentation together. I'd also like to thank some other folks who are here today in support of this idea. Our Commonwealth Attorney, Mr. Earl Mobley, the Police Department, Colonel Butler, if I have that correct. We have Ms. Gracie Taylor from the Department of Behavioral Health Care Services, and Mr. Anthony Carmichael from Southeastern Virginia ASAP. Now, when I became a judge almost 8 years ago, within the first 6 months or a year, I began to realize that in addition to the drug problem that we have had in Portsmouth, we also have folks who have significant alcohol abuse problems. And they're young people who are drinking to excess and become so intoxicated that they don't realize how intoxicated they are. And for someone who has an alcohol problem, the consequences are even worse than if you have a drug problem. Why? Because you can buy alcohol legally. It's freely available. But from hiring a lawyer to represent you when you get arrested for driving while impaired, through getting the additional insurance, for the jobs that you're not able to get, for felony convictions, if you have multiple arrests and convictions for DWI, it is completely devastating. Even a first-time DUI can result in you spending anywhere between $7,500 and $10,000 out of your pocket. So DWI courts are based on the drug court concept, and we all know that Judge Morrison has been running a successful drug court out of the Portsmouth Circuit Court for a number of years. I've been attending the annual conferences, training conferences with them now for 8 years, and I kept saying that I was going to try to pull a group of people together and begin a DWI court, and we did that this year. So in March, we applied for and received a grant to do DWI court planning. You have to have a planning team first. And we were successful in getting the grant. It's a $10,000 grant. It only pays for the training to plan the court. At some point in the future, we'll have to apply for federal funding to actually run the court. But again, we have committed to this process, myself from the General District Court, Mr. Mobley's office, the Public Defender Office, the Department of Behavioral Health Care Services. We have a professor, Mr. Rick James from Tidewater Community College. Again, Mr. Carmichael, the Police Department, and the Portsmouth Sheriff's Office. Amanda Wimberly was instrumental in writing the grant to help us secure the funding. Initially, we were scheduled to go to Athens, Georgia in October for the training. We're now scheduled to go to El Paso because we found that we have to spend this money by September 30th. And, you know, we're excited about the training. We're a little nervous about going to El Paso, though. If anybody's familiar with what happens in El Paso, Texas. So if we can go through the PowerPoint presentation, I'll just give you some facts and figures about DWI courts. We can go to the next slide. All right, the first DWI court was actually established in Miami-Dade County in Florida. That was the first drug court. And the whole concept of drug court is to combine treatments with structure and authority for behavior modification. And the whole concept is a problem-solving court. You look at what problem the person has and you modify their behavior in an effort to change it to give you a safer community. There are 1.4 million drivers arrested every year for driving while impaired. That means approximately 161 arrests every hour. 2 million current drivers with 3 or more convictions. 400,000 with 5 or more convictions. And in the year 2012, there were 10,000 lives lost in crashes involving drunk drivers. These are our Portsmouth statistics. If you'll notice, we won't have as many as, say, perhaps Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach has a task force dedicated to driving while impaired cases. But then they have over 2,000 a year. But from 2006 to 2014, misdemeanors, 2,407, felonies 89 for a total of 2,496. Now, if you'll notice, I believe these statistics are through maybe the middle of June or the end of June. Already for 2014, we had 65 driving under the influence. Total misdemeanors, though, 132. So it looks like we're on track to be on the rise again. And 9 felonies already. That means that's someone who has had at least 2 prior convictions within the last 10 years. The next slide, please. So the DWI court is a dedicated docket, similar to what happens in drug court. The whole concept is this is not a get out of jail free. It doesn't mean that anybody's going to avoid a conviction. It's a post-conviction court where they get the conviction, they do whatever jail sentence is required, if one is required, and then they enter into a treatment program. The idea is to avoid having them getting, to stop their behavior of drinking and driving. Next slide, please. So actually what we're doing is changing the approach a little bit, not just incarceration, but incarceration and treatment. What it does over the long haul is to improve public safety, saves us money. And somebody said, well, how does it save us money? It saves us money because when somebody is just like drug cases, when somebody is arrested for an offense of this nature, it doesn't just affect them, it affects the whole community. It affects their spouse, their children, and who ends up supporting them if that person is not capable of working and caring for the family. So it affects everybody. Next slide, please. And this is what I've explained before. It's a post-conviction model. And it involves everybody in the criminal justice system, the judge, the prosecutor, defense attorney, law enforcement, probation, and treatment. And there's a cooperative approach to ensure accountability. That's the first key item or effort in getting people to change their behavior is accountability. Helping them to recognize they have a problem and making them accountable for their own individual behavior. Anybody can refer the offender, whether it's law enforcement, defense, prosecutor, or any other member of the team. Next, please. And you see from these statistics that they do problem-solving courts do work. It cuts down on recidivism and prevents repeat arrests. Are there any questions?
Questions?
I think it's a
So-
good idea.
We, again, I'd like to thank everyone who's committed to working on this project. We're in the planning stages. We have to identify the offenders that we're going to help, set up the structure of the court, and then apply for funding. I'm thinking that maybe it will take us another 2 years before we actually are off the ground and up and operating.
It's federally funded?
It will be federally funded. So we're not asking for any money tonight, we're just asking for support in getting this idea across and getting it up and running.
I think you got that unanimously around this table.
Yes.
So we're all about having a safer Portsmouth and a safer community.
Absolutely.
Great idea.
Thank you for your attention.
All right.
This is such a great project, and we're happy to be working with Judge Holder. Alcohol abuse is a big, big issue for young adults. It's one of the biggest issues on our campuses. And so if we can change behavior through Judge Holder's program, I just think it's so important for us.
Yes.
So with your permission, we'll continue to work and try to make this a reality.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
The next item is a briefing on the status of the regional jail, particularly the petition from the city of Chesapeake to become a member. You would ask us to look at, too, whether or not we could either modify the jail agreement or the possibility of getting out of the regional jail. And any modification to the current agreement, and Brandon will cover this, requires 100% approval by the members of the regional jail. Any getting out requires 100% approval by the members of, so there are 4 members. It will take the other 3 parties voting in the affirmative. And think about this. If one of the members came to you and said, we want to get out and we want to get out next year, you most likely would say, fine, but you've got to pay off what your liability is from this point to the retirement of the bonds. Because if you don't say that, then that liability falls on you. Also, if a member came to you and said, how about reducing the amount that we pay? Well, it's like a water bid. If you push down on this side, it's going to go up on that side. And so we'll cover this in the agreement, in the presentation. Brandon?
John. Good evening, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. We're just going to bring you up to speed on where we are with the process of admitting Chesapeake as a member of the Regional Jail Authority. And as John mentioned, we are, the jail authority has already met and through the first reading approved the restatement of the creation and service agreements. It has a second reading on Thursday of this week. The first reading was unanimous. Assuming that this will be an affirmative vote this coming Thursday, then each of the city councils of each of the member localities will be asked to approve the restatement or amendment of the creation and service agreements. And so that'll be coming to you at your August 12th meeting, and the other member cities are going to have it on their agendas in August as well. First, a little background on the history of the jail authority. It was created in December of 1993. The original members are Portsmouth, Newport News, Hampton, and Norfolk, and the jail was opened in 1999. The document rated capacity upon its construction and up to now is 875 inmates per day, with an operating capacity of 1,313. There's going to be a slide a little later in the presentation that'll show you what the utilization has been over the history, but historically it's been between 1,100 and 1,200 inmates up until December 2012, which was the beginning of the end of the ICE detainees. And it went from a peak of 400 ICE detainees in November to really nothing ever since then. Oops. The original purpose was to provide overflow capacity for the member cities' local jails. This is, in some respects, a unique situation among regional jails in Virginia. We are the only regional jail whose members all have their own city jails. There are several other regional jails in Virginia who have members who have some city jails, but we're the only regional jail whose all of its members have regional jails, city jails.
Yeah, and this is an important point. There are 21 regional jails in the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth incentivizes regional jails because they think it's more cost effective. And as you'll see, on new construction, the state will pay 50 cents on the dollar as opposed to 25 cents on the dollar for local jail. But the point is that of the 21, there's no other regional jail in which every member has a local jail. Every one of the local members, Portsmouth, Norfolk, Hampton, and Newport News, has a facility like us. And then when Chesapeake comes on board, they will have a local jail too.
The advantage, again, is each of those jurisdictions sends its medically most needy and its most difficult inmates to the regional jail. We, in Portsmouth, actually assign all of our female inmates to the regional jail. So it really makes it easier on each jurisdiction's city jail to classify and manage inmates, because the toughest and most expensive end up going to the regional jail. In the original agreement, these are the amounts of the guaranteed capacities for each jurisdiction, and that means that each of those jurisdictions pay for that many inmates per month, whether or not they have that many inmates in there. Hampton typically has more, and so they're using excess capacity on a regular basis. Newport News and Norfolk try to keep theirs pretty much right at their guaranteed capacity, and we try to keep ours at 250. It's been a little under that for the last few years, but we pay for that 250 whether or not we have 250 in there on any given time.
And the vernacular is take or pay. You either fill the bids up, and if you don't, then you pay. You're guaranteeing that you'll pay the per diem on 250 bids.
So-
Like,
He said we're a little short. How short are we?
we have a graph that will show you.
Okay.
So if Hampton has 200 instead of 175, that has no effect on if we only have 225?
It has no effect on us.
Yeah.
Remember, we had guaranteed capacity,
Yeah.
and then we have that additional capacity. They're taken from that additional capacity.
Okay.
These are annual averages, so you can see for the last 10 years, we've got Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, Portsmouth, and then the ICE detainees. The most obvious one is the ICE detainees, which for the year fiscal year 13, it averaged out to be a little less than 250, but it was on track. This was on track to go up this way, but in December they stopped sending ICE detainees, and so then it just precipitously dropped. This is the 250 line, and you can see Portsmouth is purple. You know, we're we're a little below. I think we averaged, for FY14, we averaged 240 for the year. So
It's not bad.
it had been 236, 215, 220. This is really, when you're down at those kind of averages, that's when you're essentially paying twice for those inmates, because we're paying for them whether they're there or not, and then we're also paying for any that are in the city jail.
Is Hampton getting, for when they're over, are they paying the same rate as the 175, or?
Judy, what is the additional per diem for when they're paying over their guaranteed capacity?
I will get you the exact number, but they do get, for extra inmates, there is a discounted rate that's set each year by the board for those individuals, and each year that rate is set.
Okay.
So it's probably, I will get you the exact number.
10%, 5%.
But there is a discount.
Right, and it's set annually.
Okay. So it's voted on, approved by the board every year?
Right.
Every year.
And that's part of the budget considerations as they look.
So our number compared to the other ones, can you go back to the chart?
Mm-hmm.
Not the one before that. I think the one that showed, yeah.
Everybody's got to pay the same, well, we pay a discounted rate because the
We have
jail
this
is
year.
in
Very nice.
Portsmouth.
Right.
But we've got to pay that rate times 250 bids. And Norfolk's got to pay that rate times 250 bid, whatever the rate is for the other three jurisdictions.
What
And-
are the numbers based on? How did they come about, the numbers? Was there a formula based on population, or?
Well, these numbers were set when the whole concept of the regional jail was first broached in the early 90s. Because you had to size the jail. I mean, how big are you going to build it? You going to build it this big or that big? And so when the four jurisdictions, and I'm not here, but I can tell you how these things happen. You sit around a table and you say, well, what do you think you'll need, not only now, but in the future? And that's how, we did that number. If it's too high or too low, we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
What's the total capacity of the regional jail?
1,313.
What do we have here? 500, 875.
875, and then we're adding 250 for Chesapeake.
And so they'll have a threshold amount of 250.
Yeah, but I know this is going ahead of your slide. But your page, we don't have a page, Chesapeake agreement.
Let me
Okay.
quickly cover
No
this.
problem.
Yeah, hold that question.
Just, the question that was raised earlier by Mr. Moody was, can we get out of it, or can we negotiate something different? And as John said, you can, but it requires each other jurisdiction to approve it. And the
basically
likelihood of that is
means you
very
can't.
slim, considering they're going to say you're going to have to pay your share of the debt, and it's about $43 million outstanding right now.
That's 10
And they're
million.
probably going to say, look, you're going to cause our per diems to go up because you're pulling out. So the cost, if they allowed you to do it, the cost would make it prohibitive.
Well,
let's put the shoe on the other foot. I mean,
Oh, John,
let's,
quick question.
My question was not only exit option, but was an opportunity, since the agreement was being open to allow
For us to take the
Chesapeake's
bid.
entrance, was, as a host city, is there an opportunity to negotiate a better rate?
no, and and we tried, because it's the same situation. It takes the other three jurisdictions to agree. And if our rate goes down, their rates are going to go up. And so what I was about to say, let's say that Norfolk wanted to have a cheaper rate. What would your answer be, knowing that your rate would go up?
Have we,
You know what?
have we proposed that?
Yes. And all it takes is one to say no.
Okay, so there was a vote, and
Yeah.
Well, all it takes is one person to say no, and it's just, it's not logical that somebody's going to say yes to increasing their cost so that you get a cheaper cost.
What year are the bonds, when do they mature? What year? Do you know?
I don't know that.
Actually,
He
we
may
had
have
that
it.
in the,
It's in here. It's in the brief in here somewhere.
yep.
I saw it. It's in.
2029, they got obviously refinanced. They expire, or they're paid off in 2029, and the balance is 42.7 million.
The creation agreement there is pretty clever in the sense that it did not specify a way to get out except for everybody to agree on somebody getting out. And so let's say that Norfolk says, we want out next year, 2015. And then Norfolk is leaving a hole in the revenue stream.
$10 million, $11 million.
And so it would be natural for Hampton and Newport News and Portsmouth to say, okay, make us whole. We're not going to pick up your liability. So we'll net present value what that amount is, and you have to pay us that in cash. Plus, you've got to plug the revenue gap that's going to be there on the per diem.
It increases for us.
Okay.
But you know, John, in all the things I've ever seen about this before, I never knew that we, in addition to the discount, we got a pallet payment.
We did.
I mean, I've read regional jail reports for 6 or 8 years. I never knew there was a pallet payment. I mean, that $448,000 is not a drop in the bucket.
Chesapeake agreement, they would come in as a full member, just as any of the existing 4 members. As we talked earlier in the year, this was one of the elements that was negotiated, that they would ramp up to 250. I started out from a position that they would put 250 in July 1st, but we eventually negotiated that to 50 July 1st, and then 25 additional for each quarter, so that they're up to 250 by July 1, 2016. Also negotiated was the amount of the buy-in. We negotiated initially an equity and another. So there were 2 elements to the buy-in. Eventually, we just merged that into one buy-in amount, which would be $3 million, and that's phased over 3 fiscal years. So their first payment's due this October.
Now, are they paying for the bids plus the $1 million?
Yes, they are.
Yes. And they would pay the same member rate that currently the other 3 members pay. Portsmouth still gets a discounted rate.
So is that rate being reduced with the entry of a new member?
Well,
It would be up for all of us if we didn't take Chesapeake in. Instead of 63 and 56, it would be as much as $18 more for both Portsmouth and for the other 3 members.
Because they're coming in, that escalated amount that you brought to us a few months ago goes away,
That's correct.
that increase.
Yeah, go back to the chart that shows, you need to go the other way. ICE prisoners were extra income. They were federal prisoners, and what the policy of the Regional Jail Board was to put that money into a rainy day fund, to build it up as a reserve. They also used it to balance the budget. Well, when they went away, the prisoners went someplace else, it eliminated the buildup of the cash reserve, but it also eliminated revenue coming in to meet the needs of the operating budget. So in effect, Chesapeake is replacing the ICE prisoners. If we didn't have ICE prisoners and if we didn't have the Chesapeake prisoners, then we would be paying $18 or $20 more per jurisdiction than what we're paying now.
You said it holds 1,100 people?
13.
1,300.
Yeah. Now, when you add Chesapeake, there'll be a reserve capacity of 188 bids. Go back to the take or pay. All right, visualize another dash, Chesapeake, 250 bids. You sum that up, subtract it from 1313, it should come out to 188. And that's how much reserve capacity the jail will have. And each jurisdiction is guaranteed a percentage of that 188. Ours is roughly 42 bids.
We need 400 bids.
We need 400 bids.
That becomes a problem for us.
So really, just to wrap this up, again, we are in the process, the jail authority is in the process of taking its second vote this week, and then it'll go to each of the cities. And our intent is to put it on your August 12th agenda for approval of the restated service agreement and the restated creation agreement.
What's the likelihood of them building another pod?
It depends on the future needs of each jurisdiction. Our jail is no worse, let's say, than Norfolk. They're both built about the same time. I mean, we get the bad press. If you read the press accounts, it makes it sound like what's keeping the jail standing are the cobwebs and maybe some Christmas tree lights, but it's passing state
Get like
inspections.
100%.
Well, it's rated for 288 prisoners. On the average, there are 400 there, okay? The requirement, the state requirement on building a new jail, it's 1 prisoner per cell, okay? So if that was to be replicated someplace, it would be 400 cells. Now, just to make the math simple, let's say that the average cost per cell is $100,000. So 100,000 times 400 gets you to 40 million, okay? Now, typically what happens, and I've seen this happen because unfortunately I've built both a jail addition to a local jail and a regional jail, is that the state will come in and inspect the final product and sign off that it meets the state requirements. And as the state inspector is leaving the front door, the extra bids coming in the back door, so that you double bunk. And so a 400 capacity goes to 800. And that's just the way it is. But in order to get the jail construction money from the state, the criteria is a certain amount of square feet and one prisoner per cell.
If we go with these bids, what's the likelihood of, I mean, what is that going to do as far as us getting the jail off the water?
Well, here's the math. If you were to build a standalone jail,
Well, right now, they have the bid, so we wouldn't have to build nothing, correct?
well, but, yeah, I mean, right now.
If we say no, they have the bids available, right?
Yeah, but if you say no, then your per diem costs
Yeah.
are gonna go up.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would recommend that you say yes.
The scenario we just saw, we can't afford to say no.
No, you cannot afford, because it's gonna, per diem costs are gonna go up.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're, saying no is not a wise
Well, we
option.
fill the void with the people. It's the same numbers, correct?
Well, let me back up and answer your question. What will it cost to get the jail off the waterfront? If it was a standalone jail and still a local jail, then it would be $30 million. Okay? And again, we're doing the hypothetical.
Hypo numbers, right?
Yeah. If it was at the regional jail, and let's say that you got 50 cents on the dollar, then it would be a $20 million project. Now, that's real simple math, because we're not taking into consideration the 188. is not, that's left over when Chesapeake comes in, because that is capacity that's there. And, yeah, of that 188, we're due to get 42. If we're due to get 42, so is Norfolk due to get 42. And so there would be some negotiations that would have to be
But the
done.
general per diem cost
It's
is
50
still cheaper in the city jail than it is in the regional jail.
But think about this, you're sheriff, okay? You've got a prisoner that's got tuberculosis,
Right.
okay? What are you
Yeah,
gonna do?
I don't want them.
You don't want
No,
them.
I want them at the regional jail.
That's right, because you don't want to deal with isolating that prisoner and dealing with all the medical needs with that prisoner. You don't want that prisoner to die on you. Let's say you got a real hard prisoner that the minute that person gets up is trouble. And it's trouble all day long and all night long. What are you going to do with that prisoner?
Going to the regional jail.
It's going to regional jail. And so that's why the per diem cost, and that's true of every sheriff, and they will tell you that's where I'm going to put my sickest prisoners, and that's where I'm going to put my meanest, baddest prisoners. Why should my life be difficult?
Well, it's there, and I can see utilizing it for that, but to Elizabeth's point, everything being equal, it's still cheaper per diem-wise to house prisoners in our jail. Is that an accurate statement?
It is
It is,
cheaper
but the
because
prisoners
of
aren't the
that.
same.
Yeah,
The
but
prisoners aren't the same. That's the
that's what's
that's the
driving the
fine
cost.
print. Yeah.
Now, if everybody, and we're unique again, remember, because we're the only regional jail in which every jurisdiction's got a local jail. Most don't have local jails. You do a happy dance when you can tear down a local jail. I've done that dance before, and my city council's done that dance before. But we're in a unique situation. There are some regional jails where, let's say it's 4 members, and 2 might have a local jail, but the other 2 don't. And many of the regional jails, too, are cities and counties together. Here we have 4 cities.
But I'm just talking out loud.
Please.
In a perfect world with a unlimited checkbook, if I went out and built my new jail, my new standalone Portsmouth City Jail, I could build it so that I could also house healthy females, because there's nothing strange about a female as long as she's healthy. Segregated, yes. I could have a floor for females and keep some of them. They wouldn't all have to go out there, and that'll make more room out there for the expensive prisoners. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but.
But that's my perfect world with an unlimited
But you could have a
checkbook.
female prisoner who is pregnant at the time of incarceration, and then that becomes a additional cost. I think a question, and you can't answer it, and I can't answer it, because we were not at the table. Why didn't the 4 jurisdictions think about building a jail large enough that each of those jurisdictions could have closed their local jail at the time? That would have made more sense. And then truly you would have had a population that fits the bell curve. Would
Roughly,
not, pardon me?
roughly, what's the cost of what's our per diem there? 56?
5650, I think. Yeah, 5650.
Everybody else is
And-
63.
Yeah, and then I think Bill said it's 37, 38 to do.
Can't dance yet.
Is that the happy dance?
It's a happy dance.
It's premature to,
Well,
I was wondering what that was.
Called for the happy dance song.
well,
Now I can't turn it off.
Well, you might as well dance then.
to get, what my question was earlier. If we took those bids, the rate wouldn't have to be increased, correct?
If we took which bids?
The other 250 bids.
Well, we're gonna
We'd
pay
be
for
paying
them.
more.
Because we're
No,
gonna
what
have
I'm
our
saying-
inmates in there.
No, right.
I mean, the city jail inmates.
Right.
I'm following you.
But what I'm trying to get to is,
We don't
we
save,
still have a problem.
we don't
It's
save any
still on
money
the
by
water.
doing that because it costs more to have them out there than it does to have them in our jail. So if we took those.
Yeah, but what I'm
if we
saying
took those
is,
places out there, we'd be paying more to have them out there.
all right, yeah,
That-
but at the
that-
same
Other
time,
members
we
would
have
appreciate the
opportunity to
fact
tear
that
that jail
value
down
with healthy.
or move it.
Say again?
I said, if we take those bids, we're moving forward of having this tore down or come up with a different plan. Because what's gonna happen is we're gonna give those bids to Chesapeake and we're gonna have to sit again for 2 to 5 to 10 years to come up with the money to build our own jail. Or to make a deal with the regional jail to build another pod, and that's 3 years down the road. So meanwhile, we're gonna sit here with the jail on the waterway for the next
Well,
5 to 10 years.
Let's talk about cost, okay? Is the jail your next $20 million project? Okay, we're just talking. We had the Social Security offset last year. That was a $20 million project. We built a courthouse that,
$70 million project.
a $89 million project.
89.
In a commercial zone.
That might have been cheaper had it been built from scratch.
Right.
I mean, when you move into an existing building, I mean, it's a nice facility and it gives you, a sense of being in a nice place. But you may not have gotten that for the cheapest dollar. We've had that discussion before. So there's a relative part of your conversation. What is relative? If you were to move the jail someplace, and let's not decide whether it's a local jail or a regional jail. What is the development potential of that property? And what is the income that you will get from that? And how quickly do you want your payback to come? And so it's not like, what is our debt limit now? You remember the debt limit is
700
our debt limit is set by the state constitution. It's 10% of your total assessed value.
7.9.
And around,
745.5 million.
okay, and what's our outstanding debt?
It's about 541.5.
So you have,
2 or 3.
you got about $200 million worth of capacity left. So it's not like 20 million would put you over the limit. And hopefully, any redevelopment just adds
We're not
value.
going to tear down the jail to build a 7-Eleven.
No.
I mean, if we were doing that, it would be
Are
for something.
are we infrastructure-wise, I mean, utilities, are we,
Well, that's-
can we accommodate that at the present time?
Now with the implementing of the downtown master utility plan, remember part of the
30 million.
part of the issue was not only replacing the broken pipes, but building up the capacity for development to take place. And the answer is yes. Once we implement that plan, we end up having the fire flows that we need to have for development downtown.
How about the electric utilities?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to find out.
So my
That's a
hearing-
different, that's not our problem, that's a Dominion problem. And typically, if the customer's there, they work in the capital cost into the rate, into the equation.
John, isn't it true, or maybe Brandon's probably the one to ask? I'm back in my perfect world, to go off what Danny was suggesting. If we agree, and I think we should, to this Chesapeake proposal and this resolution to the regional jail, and next month, in September, the king of somewhere comes in and says, I want to buy your waterfront, and I want to buy it in 30 days so I can build, the newest, greatest, whatever thing, and we need to empty the jail in 30 days. Couldn't we take 150 out to the regional jail if we needed to? And isn't there capacity within the other city jails in the region to take our prisoners for a period?
Yes, in fact, I had not been in my seat much more than a day in November of 2012, when I get a call from the Virginia Beach Sheriff. When I get a call from the chairman of our school board, not as the chairman, but as the financial person at the Western Tidewater. I get a call from Doug Caskey, who was the Alawite County Administrator. Everybody wanted to take me to lunch and tell us about their ability to take our prisoners. The perception is that our jail was about to fall into the river. And that's not the case. If you want to clear that site, and the sequence, you have enough vacant land downtown that, that doesn't have to be the first to go. You got the Holiday Inn site that
Been sitting there for a while.
needs $3.2 million worth of wharf construction. But remember, there was something on that site, so you got consolidated soils. It's not like you got to do a lot to prepare that site. So it's not like your site poor. You have sites that you could sequence so that if the king of wherever comes in.
And finding 400 beds would
It's
not be a hindrance
No.
to development.
So, make sure I understand, it sounds like we're gonna build a new jail in the near future. Is that the senses I get from everybody?
Okay.
When we
I don't
need
think,
to.
I don't think we have
I don't
enough
think so.
information to
No.
make that decision.
No.
You also have, there's needs to be another party at the table, and that would be the sheriff. because the
Absolutely.
That's
sheriff-
right.
Just like we have a take a pay, the sheriff determines, where his prisoners go. And it's not like you won't hear from the sheriff, you will hear from the sheriff.
That's
Loud
never
and
been the
clear.
problem.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, and John, your point's well taken. And when we get to that junction in the road, we need the sheriff and his people sitting at the table. And
Yes, sir.
And we figure it out together. I mean, these are nice things to throw out to talk about what ifs, but as closer we get to that, but we shouldn't get too far out there without bringing them to the table, because that's just gonna cause.
Yeah, so the question
Another
today is
scenario.
about the Chesapeake joining the regional jail.
Right.
That's right.
The answer to that question
The answer to that
is
question
yes.
is, we don't have a choice.
That's
We can't afford not to
We
sign
can't
this.
afford not to.
The other piece to that equation is what kind of proposals do we have for development?
That's true.
That's what we
And
need
that's
to
the-
look at.
And that's a partnership thing, too. I mean, you have an expectation. It's one thing to say that I could build 50 townhouses on Holiday Inn, but, yeah, make it work. But is that what we want? Is that the highest and best use and the right density there? Certainly, you can make the numbers work financially. If you're a developer, you would get your 8.5%, and that's what developers look for on real estate development.
Yeah, we've had that conversation, you know what we, so.
Revisit that.
Okay, everybody comfortable?
Anything else on that? No.
All right. Andre's got one, and then, let me cover this, one late item. I am blessed with a council that's got great and good ideas, and I'm not trying to blow smoke or be patronizing. But within the same month, the month of July, I've had 2 members of council come up with the idea about the city doing a fishing pier at City Park. And I think it's a grand idea, and staff thinks it's a grand idea. Council Curtis Edmonds brought the idea up the first meeting in July. And I turned to staff, NETA, and Parks and Recreation, and said, let's start working on this, and everybody was enthused. Last week, Bill.
Actually, I brought the idea up
I know.
6 years ago.
He brought it up when Luke McCoy was the city manager.
Absolutely.
And so in the course of less than a month, we've had these 2 great ideas come, or the same idea come up. And I want to make sure that you guys are comfortable with us moving forward to start doing the work to see
The
if we can make
groundwork.
this a reality.
Exploration of it.
Absolutely.
Super.
Yeah. Okay?
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, Vice Mayor Cherry, honorable members of Portsmouth City Council. I'm here to discuss my first annual risk assessment. I want to discuss the variables used to create the risk assessment, talk about the risk issues concerning the risk assessment that we've heard in the news, and see if I can answer any of your concerns you may have so we can move forward with the audit. Risk assessment annual plan. Risk assessment is basically a process used to determine the most significant and vulnerable entities for the annual plan. So what I'm going through is I'm looking at all the business units within Portsmouth, and I'm trying to assess what are the riskiest areas to go audit. The initial risk assessment, as noted in my July 8th, 2014 presentation to Council, and noted in my July 8th letter to Council, was based primarily on those two risk drivers are the adopted budget dollars and total permanent positions. Those figures came out of the 2014 adopted budget plan. That was not a plan from any other locality. That is Portsmouth's own figures. The additional criteria in assessing the audit areas were council hotline significant inquiries and noted areas from previous audit engagements. On Wednesday, July 16th, the 2015 adopted budget was released on the intranet. The risk assessment at that time was updated for those 2015 figures. And with that update, still the audits that were selected, 3 of the top 5 audit risk areas were the same ones that were selected previously. So there was no change, there was no need to change based on audit's opinion to change the audits that we were doing. The long-term audit plan, which shows the audit direction, is not to be used as some type of confining measurement that you can't change. But the long-term audit plan shows the audit direction, and what it tries to do is ensure that we touch on each one of the riskiest areas noted within the risk assessment. As I just mentioned, the audit plan was placed on the internet site on Wednesday, July 16th. And I updated the 2015 plan. All the audits that were selected were the same. There was no change. To go back in time, the audit plan was submitted to Council for review on June 24th, 2014, and requested feedback by July 7th, 2014. The plan outlined the authority, the time frame, the process, and resources for the audit. As of July 7th, there were no changes that were requested by Council. And so I proceeded to move forward with the audit. Recently, there was a story that was run by the Virginia Pilot, inferring that the city auditor was not acting independently in picking the audits. And that was kind of based on a cover letter issue. So just to give comfort, I went back and researched all the governmental auditing standards to determine if the standards speak to the modification of cover letters. There was no specific standards that spoke to this modification, and the closest standard to address the issue was GAS section 6.41. And within this, this is taking a higher threshold. With GAS 6.41, what you're looking at is actual audit work, not a cover letter. And basically what it says is other auditors have completed audit work related to the objectives of the current audit. The auditor may use some of their work for their findings or conclusions, thereby avoiding duplication of efforts. So the point of that is, what GASB is trying to do is get to efficiency, not so much complete originality. And Now, there's work that you have to do to use the work of others. If auditors use the work of others, they should perform procedures that provide a sufficient basis for using their work. Auditors should obtain evidence concerning the other auditors' qualifications and independence, and should determine whether the scope, quality, and timing of the audit work performed by the other auditors is adequate for reliance. What I thought was interesting about GASB 6.41 is procedures that auditors may perform in making this determination include reviewing the other auditor's report, audit plan, or audit documentation, and/or performing tests of other auditors' work. The last line I think is probably the most important from my standpoint. The nature and extent of evidence needed will depend on the significance of the other auditor's work to the current audit objectives and the extent to which the auditors will use that work. Now, we're talking about a cover letter. The cover letter, the basics of it was to just say the time frame, the audits that will be conducted, the method used to decide which audits would be done, and any adjustments that will be needed for those audits. So I thought the cover letter spelled out that information pretty clearly for the user. It did not state Portsmouth would do Chesapeake's audits, or that was the rationale for how Portsmouth chose those audits. Okay. So one of the issues that as a one-man shop, one of the things I want to do is standardize the pre-field work process. So let's not reinvent the wheel to try to do basic things. Let's use our creativity for what we have to do in the field, because it is a one-man shop. Let's also utilize outside resources. I think it makes sense to do that. And some of the resources used are the Association of Local Government Auditors, or ALGA, and experience of other single shop auditors. Modifying the templates, such as modifying templates on cover letters, are not unusual in the auditing and accounting world. In fact, the cover letter used and modified by myself was actually a template previously from the city of Chesapeake. So, with that being said, as I just stated, the cover letter credited by the Virginia Pilot to J. Poole has been used in Chesapeake for the last 22 years. Per Mr. Poole, the cover letter was not written by him, but was a standard cover letter derived from the Institute of Internal Auditors template document. Now, I can go into specific details, and I will, as far as why I chose the audits that I chose. I will start with probably the most significant one as far as the article that was written. The only audit that was the same was the behavioral health services, behavioral health care services. And that audit was chosen by me. For one, it was high on the risk assessment. And two, I had worked on the risk assessment. I had worked on that audit last year, or areas within that field last year. And it was noted during last year's work that an accounts receivable balance had remained the same. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Moody has a
Sure.
question.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Well, I don't have so much a question. You used the word efficiency, and I can appreciate that word. I can appreciate what you're attempting to do here, but quite frankly, and I'm speaking for me, I don't think it's an efficient use of our time to go back and rebut a week-old newspaper letter. I think it's a lot we do need to discuss, but I don't think now's the time to do it. I hear what you're saying, but I don't think this is a good use of our time, quite frankly.
That's fair. The reason I brought it up, I did not receive any calls. I just read the article, so I wondered if there was something that council wanted to discuss with me about it. I wanted to give the opportunity. But we can definitely move forward. In fact, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I respect what Councilman Moody said, but I think it's a good idea to board it up. Since it's going to be written up from a different perspective, it needs to be corrected so that all that are watching will know the right way.
Again, that was the purpose but we can definitely move on if there's no further questions, or if anybody has any questions.
You have the floor, you should continue.
So, as stated, the next steps, which is where we're all trying to move. Because I haven't received any feedback suggesting that we should not move forward with the audits that we've planned, I've gone forward with moving forward with the police department compound audit. Held an opening conference with the police department staff, via vehicle maintenance director, and began the preliminary field work at the city impound. As I mentioned before, I haven't received any feedback different to say, don't do these audits, but if there are any concerns, I'm open to what council has to say. With that, is there any questions? No.
Good question?
Oh, I've got plenty, but they can wait.
Okay.
I would just like to say this. I think the thing is, when we look for the information and things that's coming in, if we have specific things that we want to request, it is our position as elected officials to ask specifically what it is we want to know. Then in that way, as you make your presentations, you can present to whatever it is that the issue that's being requested. It's very difficult, having worked in an auditor's position, to read minds, to get some mindset in terms of what individuals may be thinking. But it is most helpful, and I work with the whole school division, with every school with audits. So I know about, it's good if there is anything specific, to be specific in what you're requesting and the formatting that may be requested to have the information received, because otherwise your minds can roam all over the globe, you know, and I think that helps you to pinpoint things in there to get the information, but you can't read minds to pick up on what people may be perceiving. But if it's worth being answered, it should be asked of the individual who's going to have to provide the information. That's protocol, and that's called professionalism. Okay? Thank you, sir.
All right.
Appreciate you pulling the information together.
I think everybody has the actual updated risk analysis, and it shows the business units that have been selected and the years in which they are projected to be audited. So again, if there are any questions regarding this.
How the total ranking, can you explain that?
Sure. The basic drivers for the rankings were permanent positions and budget dollars. So the lower the score, the higher the risk. So the permanent positions were, the risk was assigned, the more people, the higher the risk. The more budget dollars, the higher the risk. Okay? On the next criteria was hotline or council inquiries. So if someone on council had said, hey, this is an area I think that you should look into, or if there was a significant hotline call, just not a call, but a significant hotline call, that also got a ranking. And again, the lower the inquiry rank, the more risky the project. And then the next one was based off of prior engagements. So things that I looked at the previous year and I thought would be potential issues that I needed to audit, that received a score, and again, the lower the rank.
What was looked at in the previous year?
The behavioral healthcare services.
That was, I think, directed by the city manager?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was. And at that time, like I said, the receivable balance was considerably lower. Considerably lower, and had remained the same for a period of time. I worked with the staff over at Behavioral Healthcare Services as well as the county, and they worked to correct that receivable balance.
And how much hotline information?
There have been no calls on the hotline. So I think the issue that you're looking at is hotline and council. So it's a mixed one.
Okay.
So if I read this right, the police department, I'm gonna try to make sure I understand it. Police department ranking, even though they have, the budget is higher, but because they have 200 more people, it offset the ranking and made them, put them in one position?
So to read that, they were first as far as the number of people.
Right.
They were second as far as budget dollars. So those two, and they were second as far as the total budget dollars. So those two variables, a permanent position and budget, gave them a score of 3. They then were, they had a council inquiry, which gave them another point, which was 4.
Okay.
And then I didn't have a prior engagement with them, so that gave them a higher rank that went to 2.
Gotcha.
And so those summed up to 6. And then I ranked all of them based off that total ranking.
Okay, got it, thanks.
That makes sense.
Right, and again, this is a living, breathing document. This risk assessment, it will change over time as we add more risk factors. I wouldn't expect this to be the final risk assessment that we ever use. There will be additional variables as we go forward. Any other questions?
But over a period of time, as you would look at from one category over to another, it also would give you some idea in terms of how effective the planning is going, and if we need to do a further analysis to find out what needs to be done.
Yes, over time, you will add additional factors that would be more specific to Portsmouth and
Right.
give us a better idea for this thing.
I work with a school budget.
All right. I think that's it. Thank you, Andre. Appreciate it. You got anything else, John?
Yes, sir. We have a need for a closed session.
I move to go into a closed meeting pursuant to provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711 for the following purpose. Discussion concerning the possible acquisition of real property for a public purpose on High Street and on London Boulevard, and the possible disposition of publicly held property in the Port Center and in the downtown area of the city, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating strategy of the authority as permitted under subsection A3. Consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff pertaining to a specific legal matter requiring the provision of advice by legal counsel as permitted under subsection A7, and discussion concerning the performance of a council appointee as permitted under subsection A1.
Second.
Mr. Cherry?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds? Mr. Meeks?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes.
Ms. Randall?
Yes.
Mayor Wright's absent. We are in closed. Thank you.